Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
And without further ado, please allow me to introduce Walter Mosley is the author of more than 50 critically acclaimed books, including the major best-selling mystery series featuring Easy Rawlins. His work has been translated into 25 languages and includes literary fiction, science fiction, political monographs, and a young adult novel. In 2013, he was inducted. Gotta stay off the news. Gotta stay off the news before our events. Gotta stay off the New York Times before an event. Inducted into the New York State Writers Hall of Fame, and he is the winner of numerous awards, including an O. Henry Award, the Mystery Writers of America's Grand Master Award, a Grammy, and PEN America's Lifetime Achievement Award. He currently lives in New York City. Please welcome Walter Mosley.
Hello, hi, how are you? I'm okay. I kind of think of what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to read from the book. And what to say? This, I have published 57 books, and over the last 27 years. But this book I've been writing for 20 of those years. I've just been writing it, like, kind of continually. And I didn't finish because I couldn't figure out what the ending was. Like, and if the ending kind of informs the rest of the book. It goes, like, backwards. And so I just kept trying to do that and not doing it. And so then I finally figured it out, and so that was good. I said, well, the hard part is writing the book that takes you 20 years to write, And then I started sending it to publishers. I sent it to 17 publishers, and they all rejected it. And, it was kind of funny, because I said, well, I didn't ask for that much money, all things considered. I mean, they would have made it back. And it was like, and like people would say things like the whole thing would be too intellectual. Like that would be the whole rejection. One woman said, I'd be happy if you come in and I could talk to you about how you write a novel, which I'm like, really? Because I've probably written more novels than you've read, it's like, and so there was that. And it was a long process of rejection. And wondering, because when people reject you, you think maybe you did something wrong. I mean, maybe, but I would reread the book, and I said, well, it looks okay, and then I would send it out again, but finally, Grove Atlantic, which is funny, like it would be the best press to take my book for me as far as I was concerned, and so they published it, and they said they published it, and I did some work on it, and I think it was good work, but not a deep change to the book. Now, and I think, but the reason that people were rejecting the book was I think I figured it out, because I'm Walter Mosley, so I write urban, gritty novels, and we live in capitalism. Capitalism, the main thing of capitalism is the production line. The main thing about the production line is specialization. I put the left front tire on the Pinto. If you put the left front tire on the Pinto, you can't come in one day and say, I'd like to install the air conditioning. They said, well, you need a whole new education to, So Walter Mosley, the gritty urban, writer, is writing, about, the concepts of history and concepts of historians. So, and philosophers. So I'm talking about Nietzsche, and I'm talking about, Roman philosophy, about fate, and, all this other stuff. And the people who were reading the book didn't know what I was talking about. And they also didn't believe that I knew what I was talking about. So if I was Cornell West, they might have published a book, because, he was at an Ivy League college. But Walter Mosley, who was urban and gritty, uh, can't write the novel. It's kind of it was like an interesting like series of events. Trying to get out of your box. You know, like I mean, everybody like in America is always trying to get out of their box. Mostly they fail, and if they succeed, they get less money. I mean, that's kind of the truth of everything. But that's okay. It's not so bad because money is like the problem in the first place. So I've written this book. It's a very intellectual book. However, it's me writing a book. So there's there's sex and there's violence and there's and there's a lot of personality and character and kind of contradictions and even a little bit of mystery here and there. And so so it's not boring like a lot of novels of ideas that I read. I mean, I said these are really good ideas, but I don't want to read this book. I really just somebody tell me the ideas. One, this idea, two, that idea. So anyway, so I'm going to read very short, and I don't remember having read here before. I may have, but since I haven't read here before, I'll explain to you why I read very short. There are two reasons. The first is if the longer you read, the fewer people buy your book. And so that's just it. That if you read long enough, they say, "Are you going to buy it?" I said, "Man, I already heard that book." I'll buy his next book maybe. But and the second thing is then I can answer questions, which I like doing. So I've chosen a chapter in the middle of the book, which I think gives you an idea of the breadth of the character and his experiences, John Woman. The only thing I'll say is that just before he's in this car driving, he's teaching at a university in Arizona. Just before he was in the car driving, he was at a prostitute's motel in a place called Spark City. And just the understanding thing about him and the prostitute is whenever he goes in, she says, "Well, do you want me to tie you to the chair or to the bed?" I mean, that's who John is, in a way. All right, so he's driving away back to the university where he teaches. The speedometer hovered around 90. John didn't feel the cold, only speed and wind. 10 miles from faculty housing, a shiny-eyed coyote darted into the road. It lowered itself on its haunches, yellow eyes glaring at the sports car's headlights. Without thinking, John jerked the steering wheel to the left. The car skidded out into the desert, spinning uncontrollably as it went, knocking down several acatillo trees. Finally, the car raised up on its right side, almost rolled over, then crashed down on its wheels and juddered for long seconds while the metallic frame strained and creaked. The radio came on. James Brown was singing "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" on an oldie station. The right headlight winked out. The stars, John thought, must be laughing at the crazy dance of the classic car. He also wondered about the meaning of the song. Though he'd learned his profession from his father, Herman, his mother's superstition still held sway over his heart in much of the same way that the hovering half-moon controlled faraway tides. 20 or so feet from the car, the topaz-bright eyes of the coyote blinked. The creature, John imagined, had run away, but then returned, thinking that maybe there was some food spilled or better, blood to lap up at the scene of the accident. Gazing at each other over the desert span, both man and canine were motionless. John considered honking the horn to frighten away the sometimes deadly desert jester, but instead he climbed over the side and stood there. Illuminated by the single headlight, the black and brown streaked beast sniffed the air. Maybe John had been wounded. The scent of his blood on the breeze. The coyote yipped, hopped, and then in the middle of a turn, disappeared. John leaned back against the warm hood. There was a chill in the air. His mother would have said that it was all a single sign. He should see either a priest or a fortune teller to decipher the meaning. But he was afraid of seers and holy men, worried that their powers might be based on something real, that they'd find him out if he got too close. So he climbed back into the one-eyed green T-bird and drove the 10 miles back home. The faculty complex was protected by 12-foot-high matte adobe walls. The wrought iron gate across the driveway was locked at night, attended by a uniformed guard, but the late-night sentry was not at his post. John stopped at the barred entrance, sat back in the driver's seat, and fell immediately to sleep. He was sitting in a dark room. Fancifully pulsing light came through large industrial-like windows. The neon pulse was from a blinking sign somewhere outside. This light was blue and red. These colors refused to combine. Each time the sign flashed, John saw something different. The first burst revealed a bookcase filled with tomes, some of which were hundreds of years old, while others were modern-day publications with gaudy book jackets promising things unworthy of the written word. The second flare of blue and red illuminated a high wall where some mad painter had fashioned a huge ogre made mostly from thick black and brown brushstrokes with hints of scum green here and there. The third blaze slammed down on Chapman Lorraine's corpse, a deep and bloody cleft in his temple. The dead man was seated awkwardly on a tarnished brass throne, festooned with huge, cool-colored man-made jewels that were both opaque and brilliantly striated with platinum radiance. The light faded, but John could see the afterimage of Lorraine quite clearly. There seemed to be some kind of intention in his unfocused eyes and the crooked grasping of his powerful fingers. He's trying to hold on to me through life, my life through me. He's trying to hold on to life through me, Dreamer John thought. The neon pulsed again. John was afraid that the new brilliance would bring Lorraine fully alive, that those dead hands might drag him back to pay for his crime. But instead, the light seemed to trap the dead man in its cloying glow. Chapman was stuck to his blackened throne. Dreamer John took in a deep breath that came out as a sigh. After 2 or 3 of these exhalations, he noticed a sound, a gentle tapping. The light went down, and the tapping stopped. When blue and red filled the room once more, it started up again. John found himself walking down a long, dusty hall, guarded by sleeping dogs beneath hanging candelabras. The candlelight flickered, forming and reforming the walls into hallucinatory images. These possible, impossible subjects ranged from hummingbirds frozen in mid-flight to huge Soviet farm tractors that appeared to be breathing. His father was wearing a scuffed-up suit of armor, seated upon a brass-plated horse. Dreamer John wore a shapeless hat and carried a rude rucksack fashioned out of simple calicoed cloth. A column of tiny spiders marched in the opposite direction along the edge of the wall. Looking closer, John saw that the spiders were actually little severed human hands, their fingertips frantically stamping on the floor. The tapping came again. John looked up. He was standing at a plain wood door. Who is it? Me, of course, a woman said. She sounded older, if not elderly. It was a familiar voice, but he couldn't place it, like the first notes of a song on the radio. You know the tune, but can't name it. He hesitated. After a few seconds, he felt something wet and warm against his hand. He flinched and saw that it was one of the guard dogs, now awake, come to greet him. John smiled at the friendly gesture and pulled the door open. The woman standing there was short, in her early 50s, thin but not skinny, with dark brown skin like chocolate fudge. Her full-length dress was made from natural canvas-like material, printed with 5 or 6 rude images of blue and red roses. She wore a cotton hat that was round with a ridge along the brim. 6 daisies grew out of the top as if from soil. Her glasses held delicate pewter frames surrounding large brown eyes that watched him closely. There was half a smile on the woman's lips. The smile tweaked his memory. You're a fairy godmother, he stammered. Her smile deepened. You're my fairy godmother, he said, shocked. How are you, Cornelius? Not too good, he said. I mean, nothing's all that bad, but it's cold in here and my homework is so boring and I can't get the man I killed out of my head. He's back there in the living room. I don't remember his name, but yes, the children's goddess said. She patted his shoulder and walked past him down the candlelit hall of dust, drowsing dogs, and impossible images. All that's over now. When he turned to follow, John felt burgeoning elation in his chest. After one step, he was grinning. Another, and he began to laugh. Instead of a third stride, he hopped, landed, and swung from the waist, like doing the hokey-pokey dance when he was in kindergarten. He stopped there, watching the brown goddess traipse toward the flashing neon at the end of the passageway. He wanted to go after her, but was suddenly afraid of the passion rising in him. What's your name? He shouted. Posterity, she said, not turning. Professor. Professor, someone was shaking his shoulder. There was an intense light shining. John's head hurt so badly he wanted to tear out his brain. Professor, stop shaking me, Jasper, John complained. My head feels like it's going to bust. The big Hopi had a set expression that revealed nothing, not joy or glee, anger or love. He called himself Jasper because he liked the stone. Jasper Hutman was the name the university put on his paycheck, but John knew his given name was Hototo. Hototo believed that his tribesmen were put on earth to bring peace and harmony everywhere they went. Does that mean that the Hopi people are here to save the world? John had asked Hototo early one Tuesday morning when he just returned from Senta's motel room. No, the big brick-red man replied. There are too few of us and too many of everyone else. All we do is carry a little piece here and there, casting it on the waters and hoping for the best. Jasper shook John's shoulder again, and the history professor sat up straight. You shouldn't sleep out here in your car, Professor. There's all kinds of bad characters up and down this road, and you know they won't think twice about people like you and me. The memory of the fairy godmother came into John's mind. I was waiting for you and fell asleep, John said. You were smiling, Hototo remarked. I think I had a revelation. Thank you. So any thoughts, ideas, minor criticisms? Yeah. Yes.
I'm a poet, and when I listen to you read, I hear the poetry in your story. And it wasn't what I was expecting. So for me, what it does, it brings me in a way that holds me. I want to know what's going to happen next. Where's the next poem coming from as you read?
Mm-hmm.
And I love the experience.
Why, thank you. And I just want to say that, when I write about writing, like I have a book, this year you write your novel, and I have a whole section on poetry. And in the new one, I just wrote one called Elements of Fiction, and I have James Wright's poem, about being in that hammock. The title's too long, I never remember it. But it's that beautiful poem at the end where it says, I've wasted my life. The thing is that when I studied writing, the only thing that I took every semester was poetry. I'm a terrible poet, but I that almost everything outside of plot and character development is in poetry. Condensation, word choice, music of language, assonance, rhyme, all of that stuff is there. And if you understand it in poetry, then you can understand it in prose, because they started out as the same thing, right? And so anyway, I just want to say that I appreciate you singing it, and it's something that I try to do, because in prose that just lies flat, saying, well, he walked into the place, he pulled out the gun, he shot the man in the head, and walked out. I mean, it works for Hemingway, but honestly, it does. But it really, after a while, it's just but how does that feel? Is that up to me how it feels, or maybe I can tell through the characters? Anything else? Yes.
I thought it was great. One thing that stood out to me was when you said the elderly woman's voice you heard, but couldn't pinpoint it, sort of like on the radio when you hear the beginning of the tune, don't know the song, and that happens all day when I'm listening to the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me of I think most of your books you have analogies like that. I was just curious if when you're writing, are you just thinking, oh gosh, what analogy makes sense, or is it just sort of come to your head that one, for example?
The other thing about writing for me is this, but this is true about all art. I mean, really, all art, including architecture. Most of it's unconscious. So, if you try, if you approach the written word as a conscious thing, I know what he's gonna say, I know what he's thinking, I know what they're doing, it's really hard to come up with that stuff. But if you're writing it as if he were saying it, and he's explaining it to you, he said, "Yeah, I heard her voice," and it's like when you hear a song on the radio and you can't, it's like it's that, Then you might have to write it differently. So it doesn't quite work saying it like that. So you change it and you change it. But the notion that you already know it before you write it, it's true, but it's unconscious. And so coming up with stuff like that becomes easier because I'm confident that the character or the narrator, in this case, the narrator understanding the character, has what he's feeling. Yeah. Yes.
Speaking of the consciousness, I teach students literary analysis using Thank You Ma'am and Crimson Shadow, so they can see the
Mhm.
connection between the two.
Mhm.
And they're very inspired by that. For some of my students, it's the first time they understand that an author has a real plan when they sit down and write something out. But one area where they always struggle with is the intentional use of color, especially in that story,
Mhm.
with the spider, with the title. And then right now in the section of the book where I'm at, color showing up with the car being green and the yellow and the blues and the reds. And I was wondering how intentional your use of color is.
Well, I mean, right? The thing about the unconsciousness in art, it's like this. It worked. I mean, I can explain it in writing like a novel, because what you do is you write a novel or a story, and then that's the first thing. It's like when somebody comes up to me and says, I read War and Peace," and I go, "Well, how many times?" And they look at me like, "Once." I said, "Well, that's not really reading War and Peace. I mean, you got to read War and Peace quite a few times before you get what he was doing." And it's the same thing about writing. You write it again and again and again. So you come up with ideas like colors, but or anything else. And when you first write them, they mean something, but you don't know what it means. But as you work it through, and then you say, and so when you decide to leave something, it's because you've worked out what the relationship between those things are. And so at some point the choice is conscious. But in the beginning, all those first drafts, it just yes?
You were, let's say, disaffected in terms of the way the society was going 20 years ago. How does that compare with your feelings today?
Well, to say disaffected, I'm not sure. I'm a very optimistic person. I really am. And it's like, I'm like talking to people that are saying they're leaving the country, and I said, well, where are you going to go? You're going to go to China? You're going to go to Russia? You're going to go to the Philippines? You're going to go to Sudan? You're going to go? I mean, really, honestly, like you look at the world and you say, damn, I say, I'm going to leave here because it's so terrible. And I'm going, well, okay. And I guess there are other places that might be better. I mean, I can think of a few that don't want my friends, but I'm not unhappy. Like, for instance, I'm not unhappy with the world. I'm Easy Rawlins, Mouse, Jackson Blue, all of these people in the Easy Rawlins novels. As time is going on, their lives are getting better. Like, Mouse is like, he's like a heist expert now. He does heists all over North America. Jackson Blue is a genius at computers, in the late 60s, and he worked for one of the largest French insurance companies in the world, and he's a high vice president. Easy has, he has money, he has like he has an office. And in talking about things like that, I'm talking about possibilities. Like there's growth, and there's growth about from who you are. So I don't know if I'm disaffected. I'm not. I don't know. I think there are a lot of bad things happening in America in politics, and I know it's our fault for not supporting and making Obama do what we wanted him to do. And when I look at all the possible Republican presidents, Trump is by far the least offensive. I mean, speaking, he's the most offensive, but what he would get done is the least, because those other guys would never talk. They just do that shit, And so I'm we would just have the Supreme Court, I mean, it wouldn't be better, under Pence, But I'm not disaffected, and I see definite growth in Black culture, and I would like the rest of the country to recognize like Black heroes, Black philosophy, Black action, Black notions that really have worked a lot to bring us from one place to another. you know? And so anyway, that's the answer to that question. Yeah. Yes.
So you say that on the whole you're optimistic, but one of the main parts of this novel is seems completely opposite to that. I mean, you have a university. I don't want to spoil anything, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a cabal sort of behind
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's
Yep.
not very optimistic because their notion is that the only way that we're going to make these changes is not through a democratic enlightened process, but we're sort of
Yeah, but they're up against John, and the end of it.
I hope there's another novel.
Well, no, there won't be another novel, but
Right. So if it's just him, though, are they going to be?
well, I honestly like look, I don't think it's pessimistic to say we have enemies in the culture. I mean, I met a guy on an airplane once, and he said, well, I'm in charge of sales for Walmart. I do research and sales for Walmart. And I said, what do you research? He goes, left-hand buyers. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, 90% of people are right-handed, so we set things up for them to see and buy. But how do we get that other 10% to see and buy those things? And I study that, and I make changes architecturally and mirror and this and that. And I'm like, damn, that's how close their study is. Me knowing that doesn't make me pessimistic. It just knows the breadth, the ends that my enemies will go to, to do this. It's good to know that, It's good to understand, what's happening and what's going on. I don't know. I don't think that seeing that there are bad things means that you can't, and even in the Platinum Path, that's the name of this organization in the book, even the Platinum Path, there are good things to the Platinum Path, though, and John understands it and even appreciates it, but he can't do it. He said, man, I can't do that shit because I know what history is, and you're trying to pretend that you control history. And let me tell you, no one controls history. Yes? What do you mean a personal connection? Not so much drugs. Yeah. I'm not. Well, I. Yes, but I'm not really sure that I could explain it. Cornelius, before John Woman becomes John Woman, his name is Cornelius Jones, and he's 16 and he's kind of skinny, and his mother, he's just madly in love with his mother, but she's kind of distant in a way, and he has to take care of his father, who's really one of the most brilliant men who's ever lived, and he's doing his father's job, and he's going to school, and he's and like he has a little mattress upstairs that he masturbates in, and kind of he can't really stop doing that, like you are when you're 15 and 16. You're going, wow, I need to masturbate again. That's been, it's been 4 minutes. And then this giant guy bursts in and grabs him and starts shaking him and saying, I'm going to fire your father and you're going to be in the streets. And he grabs this thing and hits him and kills him. And there's a connection there between how weak he is and how vulnerable he is and how he responds. And in that, it has something to do with me and how I think of myself and thought of myself at some point. But it's not like I run around beating up people. You know what I mean? It's like, or but to think, well, what happens, and then to understand who he is in relation to that act, which is really that's what the book is about. Who he is in relation to that act. Yes. It depends on the book, I mean, this book was writing the ending, When I wrote Killing Johnny Fry, my erotic novel, it was, trying to saying, I got to stop. I only write 3 hours a day, and I don't want to write any more than that, because I couldn't stop writing it. Mysteries, a lot of times, it's how the plot works and how the plot works according to the story being told and the changes in the characters that are, the main characters in the story.
What about the
Well, it depends on which one it is. Same thing. I mean, like, each book brings up a different. Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship you had with this book for the time that you were working on it?
Well,
Did you
it
put it down at this part, or did it just keep coming to you in little bits, or did you keep revising? What happened?
Well, I couldn't finish it, like I said, because I couldn't find the ending, and if I couldn't find the ending, I didn't know how to get to the ending. I mean, that was the problem. And this book, I mean, I couldn't tell the people I was sending the book to, like, because it sounded like I was whining, So, but I did go to a PhD program in political theory, and I studied these people, and I know them, and it's like, and I understand, like, there's a notion that history of deconstructionist thinking. History is the only truly deconstructionist art. It's because history didn't happen. Whatever you think, something else happens. Like you go to your aunt and say, remember that time when I did this and that? And say, oh, no, you didn't do that. Your brother did that. And you're like, what? Or the other point, history happens in the future. So, Richard III is a villain for 6 centuries. And now all of a sudden, we realize, hey, he was a really good guy. He was working with the working class. As we change, our perception of history changes. As our science changes, our perception of history changes. Like, there's like all of this stuff. And we never have a full concept of it, And so, I mean, I was trying to make that work with an ending. And that was like, very difficult, And that's what he says. I mean, John is a professor. He has like 4 or 5 lectures in here. They're short, but they're about like, how do you know? Well, well, tell me about yourself. He said, oh, I can talk about what they did, but I can't talk about what I did. If I can't talk about what I did, I should like get another profession, because history is about what happened, and the first thing that happened was your life, right? And that's why he tells people, my job is to dissuade you from becoming historians, because it's the hardest thing you will ever do if you do it right, Yes.
Okay, so in your opening remarks, you made this comment that you were having trouble with producing the book,
Mm-hmm.
and that the rejections you received had to do with sort of an over-intellectualism.
Mm-hmm.
And that struck me because when I think of the various series that I consider close to my heart, whether it's Easy Rollins or Socrates Fortlow or newest Lee and Ed McGill, thinking these are really, I mean, all the characters are in myriad ways deeply
Mm-hmm.
intellectual. Did these publishers not read your other books, or is there something very different going on here with respect to this idea that it's too intellectual that I'm missing?
Well, he actually gives, like lectures on things like the Roman philosophy of amor fati, love your fate. And then he compares that to Nietzsche, who talks about the finite universe, And so I think that when I say things like that, they kind of go, oh my God, because, they haven't read about amor fati, and the gritty urban fiction writer probably hasn't either. And so he might be wrong, and we'll get in trouble. The New York Times will tell us that he's stupid, and we were stupid for publishing him. I think that that's part of it, But another part, which I find very interesting, a very powerful book review section editor, the guy who runs the whole thing. We called him, I don't know, 13 times, 14 times, and sent him the book, sent him things about the book, sent him reviews of the book, sent him the book again. And finally, on the 13th time, somebody talked to him, and we said, well, what did you? So we really want to make sure that who you're going to give it to, will understand it. And he said, well, I gave it to the mystery editor. And the publicist said, but he's not a mystery writer. And he said, it's Walter Mosley. Of course he's a mystery writer. Hadn't looked at the book, but he saw my name, and and now hopefully the mystery editor will kind of pick a literary reviewer to review the book. That's the only choice we have left. But I mean, there's a lot of capitalist presupposition.
So very perplexing to me. I'm sorry. I see deep philosophical content in these other works, even if it's not explicitly
Yeah, but but like people think I'm a mystery writer. And in America, mystery writers are a couple of levels down from good writing. You might almost tell your kid, well, don't read that. It won't be good for you. You should read Shakespeare instead, Not understanding what Shakespeare's about at all. It's like, but hey. Yes? Where? Wherever I am. Often, but sometimes by hand. Always, when I'm halfway through the reviews, the revisions, I read it out loud into a tape recorder. I wrote this morning in San Francisco because that's where I was this morning. And tomorrow morning I'll write in Los Angeles because that's where I'll be. But on a computer most often. I was a computer programmer before I was a writer, and so I'm used to working on computers, and it's easier than a lot of other ways. Because I just wrote this whole novella, Leonid McGill novella by hand. And when I got to the end, I said, oh, damn, I'm going to have to type it into my computer now. It's like I'm going to have to spend the same amount of work that I spent writing it, putting it in I could hire somebody to do it, I guess, but I still have to read it and make sure they didn't make 10,000 mistakes, which they did, of course. Did I answer? Yes?
When you write, like, say, wherever you are, so when you do, like, for example, the Leonid books, and most take place in New York City, do you walk around the city to sort of set the scene?
No. I mean, I do walk around the city, but that's like another thing. I'm walking around the city. I'm doing that. And I make up stuff. We were talking earlier about that. Describing places and knowing places. Like I wrote a guy came up to me once and he said, "Man, when Easy Rawlins was down there on Dinker?" He said, "Man, I knew that block. I used to live there." Now I made up that block. You know what I'm saying? But the point of somebody believing it. And you being true to the validity of what a corner looked like, and what the stoplight was and where the rust mark. Yeah, you could do that. But it's you could just make up stuff too. And it's just as good because it's the sense of the place that you want to get, not the reality of the place. Yeah.
Your character, John Woman, is that a play on names?
It's a deconstruction. So you have to read like it to get because it's a detailed description. When he comes up with it, you go, oh, but just to explain it wouldn't make sense. But it's a deconstruction, and I personally wanted a name that nobody else in America had, and woman isn't a valid last name in America. It is in Italy and France and a couple other places, but not here. Yes. Blue Light, yeah. I mean, it's my favorite in as much as I like rereading it. There's no other book that I've written that I like rereading, but I really like rereading that book. I just have so much fun with it. So many people hate it, They go, I hate that book. That's awful. Don't ever write anything like that again. A woman said that to me once. Don't ever write anything like that again. Okay. Yeah, all right. Yes? Not in the last, not in this little piece of a century, and not in the last century. Before that, I think there are writers who, writers did everything. Charles Dickens, he did everything. I mean, Mark Twain, he did everything. He might write a fantasy, he might write science fiction, he might write a mystery, he might write, a historical. He's just like all over the place, and nobody questioned it. And now it's because it's based on how you're going to make money, it becomes very difficult. Somebody says, "Well, you do this." That's why I have so many publishers. What happens is I write an Easy Rawlins novel, and then I write another novel, and my publisher says, "Well, I would like an Easy Rawlins novel." So, "Well, I want this one." They go, "No." So then I go to another publisher and I say, "Well, here's this non-Easy Rawlins novel. I want you to do it." And they say, "Okay, but we want to sign a deal that the next book you write is an Easy Rawlins novel." So I do. I write that book, and then I write Easy Rawlins. And then I write another book, and they say, "Well, we don't want that. We want another Easy Rawlins." Okay, and then I go to another publisher. I just keep moving, because I mean, really, fuck that. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, what? it's like they'll pretend like you're doing something creative, but no, they really want to see that same book again, and a little bit different, and with me they say a little less sex, and I go, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go to another publisher. I like Grove, I might actually work with them, we'll see.
Are they getting another Easy Rollins?
No, they didn't ask for an Easy Rollins. I'm doing one for Hachette. I'm Little Brown is doing another Easy Rollins, and the Leonid Miguel. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
You may have spoken to this elsewhere, but so how do you decide what you want to do at any given time, or do you mapped out?
I don't know. Sometimes people pay me. They say, "Here's some money. Write this book," and I write that book. But sometimes I just start writing, like the Leonid Miguel and elements of fiction. I was just in between things. I said, "Oh, I have some time. I'll write this other thing," and that's what came up. It moves back and forth. Yes.
When I first learned about your books when I was in college in a freshman year, English teacher or professor assigned Bill and Blue Dress, and I didn't know you, so I Googled you, and one of the things that came up was that Bill Clinton said you were one of his favorite authors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When that happened, what was that like? The president saying, "Oh yeah, Walter Mosley."
Well, on one hand, anybody saying they like your book is like a great thing, and it's like, and it's hard to be greater than it with anybody. On the other hand, it made it so that every journalist in the world knew who I was, which made a difference, so like I could always talk to people, and I just actually did Bill and Patterson did this book together, so like we went to the Schomburg Library, the historically black library of New York, and they presented the book there, and I was their interlocutor. I asked them questions, stuff like that. I like, it's fun. Bill's a really smart guy. He's really, really smart. It's like scary, actually, and and it also you learn, like, no matter how smart you are, you can't run the world. No matter how smart you are, you can't know history. But yeah, I liked it. I liked it. Yeah.
I talked to a friend of mine today mentioning the Devil in Blue Dress, and she's an administrative law judge,
Mm-hmm.
retired, and she said that book changed her life.
Wow.
Because it gave her an insight into a world she never knew.
Mm.
So I told her if I had a chance, I would pass that along to you.
That's great. Well, thank you. It's like, one hopes that, because, one of the things about me, I think, as a writer in America, is that there are very few, almost no writers, black or white in America, who write about black male heroes. There's a lot of black male protagonists. James Wright, Ralph Ellison, most of Chester Himes, but though not all of it. And a lot of the writers from back then, lesser known writers, to become a black man of power and dignity, you have to be self-critical. But the self-criticism is so deadly. And I just like writing about like people that I love. That black male heroes filled my life when I was a kid. They took care of me. They made me laugh. They took me places. They everything in my life was defined by these incredibly intelligent, incredibly sensitive, incredibly musical men. It was so wonderful. And they're like just not in the fiction anywhere, by white people, by black people. And black women write about female heroes, but black men don't, and other people don't either. They think they do, but they don't. They think Shaft is a hero, but he's not. He's not. So have I done it? I've answered all your questions. I assume I did. Listen, thank you very much for coming. If you want a book, I'll sign it. And thank you.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.